The wind cut through the dry plains of Wyoming like a sharpened knife, carrying dust and secrets alike. It was March 12, 1883, and the small town of Red Rock barely stirred beneath the pale dawn. Whispers floated through the streets as the townsfolk tidied their porches and exchanged knowing glances. That girl, she's tough, but can she handle him? Clara Bennett's hands were already raw, the tips cracked and bleeding from early morning chores. She had come to this unforgiving land with nothing but grit and determination, promising herself she'd work until her hands bled and her spirit ached to make the barren ranch thrive. But when she first met Elias Harper, the widowed rancher with hollow eyes and a guarded heart, his gaze seemed to weigh her very soul. He didn't ask about her strength, her determination, or the calluses she wore like armor. Instead, he asked the question that made her stop cold. Can you be a mother? The words hung between them like smoke from a dying fire, whispering of past losses, unhealed scars, and the possibility of a future neither dared to hope for. Lanterns flickered in the windows behind them. Saloon murmurs drifted across the street, and Clara wondered if her promise would ever be enough to reach the lonely man whose grief was deeper than the Wyoming night that sun had barely breached the horizon when Clara Bennett's boots crunched over the frost-hardened earth, each step stirring dust that danced and twirled in the pale pink light. The wind carried the sharp tang of winter lingering in the air, whipping her skirts around her legs and catching strands of hair that escaped the bun at the nape of her neck. Harper Ranch lay before her like a challenge carved in wood and stone, the barn leaning slightly with age, its boards warped and splintered, the corrals weathered and cracked under seasons of neglect. The pastures stretched in uneven waves, browned by frost and trampled by livestock, whose low calls echoed across the quiet expanse. Clara inhaled deeply, the cold biting at her lungs, tasting the promise and the peril of the work ahead. Her hands itched to begin, her fingers already raw from the rough travel, yet the weight of the task pressed heavy against her chest. From the distance she could hear the town stirring. A dog barked sharply, a wagon wheel groaned along the main street, and voices carried faintly, laced with curiosity and judgment. "That girl thinks she can handle it?" whispered one. "I've seen city girls crumble in a day," said another. Clara clenched her fists and tightened her jaw, ignoring the murmur, yet the scrutiny prickled at her like the sting of frostbite. She set down her pack and ran a gloved hand along the barn door, feeling the splintered wood under her palm, the rough texture grounding her. Horses in the corral shifted nervously, snorting clouds of breath into the chilled air. She called softly, "Easy now, girl," letting the animals sense her patience before her strength. It was then that he appeared, stepping from the shadow of the house, tall, shoulders squared, his coat dusted with the grit of the land, eyes the color of storm clouds reflecting years of loss. Elias Harper didn't speak at first, merely studying her, the lines of his face etched deep with guarded wariness. His gaze drifted to her hands, noting the raw skin and the calluses she bore like armor. "You work hard, I see that," he said, voice low, carrying both caution and curiosity. "But can you be a mother?" The question fell into the air like a stone into a still pond, sending ripples of unease across her chest. Clara's stomach tightened and her throat felt thick, but she straightened, lifting her chin to meet his eyes. "I can do what's needed," she replied quietly, letting determination anchor her words. Elias nodded once, slow and deliberate, not entirely convinced but unwilling to look away. She turned to the barn, fingers brushing over the rough handle of the door as she pushed it open. The smell of dust and hay hit her immediately, mixed with the faint tinge of livestock and old leather. A rake lay forgotten in a corner, a rope coiled near the stall. She set about feeding the horses, her motions careful yet practiced, tossing hay, checking water troughs, noting every detail of disrepair. Sweat beaded at her hairline, despite the chill, and she could feel small cuts forming on her palms, tiny reminders that labor was never gentle. The sun climbed higher, casting golden shafts through gaps in the barn boards, illuminating floating dust motes that twirled like tiny specters around her. From the house, Elias watched silently, occasionally stepping closer to adjust a gate or measure a post, never intruding, yet always present. By midday, Clara had repaired a section of the fence, her knuckles scraped, her back aching, yet a flicker of pride warmed her as the boards held firm under her testing push. A young ranch hand passed, glancing at her with a mix of respect and surprise. "Didn't think she'd last the morning," he muttered to another. Clara caught his look, offering a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that she had and would persist. The afternoon was a blur of chores, mending fences, cleaning stalls, hauling feed. Each task left her bruised, the sting of scraped skin and pulled muscles a constant companion. The wind shifted, carrying distant thunder from the mountains, a warning of storms yet to come. She paused briefly, hands on her knees, breathing in the scent of earth and hay, feeling the pulse of the ranch beneath her fingers, the heartbeat of a place that demanded more than effort. It demanded resilience, courage, and care. As twilight approached, she dragged herself to the porch, leaning against the railing as the first stars blinked awake in the vast expanse above. The wind softened, carrying whispers of the town and the quiet promise of night. She stared upward, eyes tracing constellations she barely knew, contemplating the cost of the vow she had made. Her hands were raw, her body weary, yet her heart thrummed with a stubborn hope. Somewhere in the distance, Elias's silhouette remained, watching, uncertain but undeniably drawn. The ranch lay around her, silent except for the soft creak of the wind through the eaves and the low murmur of livestock settling in their stalls. She clenched her fists, tasting both fear and determination, and whispered into the chill, "I will work till my hands bleed." And more. The stars above shimmered, bearing witness to her resolve, and the wind carried her promise across the plains, a soft echo of commitment and courage, lingering against the quiet hum of the sleeping land. As the night deepened and shadows stretched long across the battered yet enduring Harper Ranch, the evening sun dipped low, painting the Harper Ranch in molten gold, dust motes suspended in the shafts of light like flecks of memory caught in amber. Clara's hands were raw and stained with sweat, but her laughter, light, unguarded, echoed through the empty rooms of the house, softening the hollow spaces where grief had long lingered. Elias paused mid-step, leaning against the doorway, the flickering shadows from the hearth casting sharp lines across his weathered face. There was something in the way she moved, deliberate yet tender, that stirred something long buried in him, a recognition that strength could wear a gentleness he had almost forgotten. Suddenly, a sharp scent of smoke pulled their attention to the barn. Black tendrils curled into the sky, thick and menacing, carried by the wind that rattled loose shutters. "Clara!" Elias called, his voice tight with alarm. She had already dropped the bucket she carried and was sprinting across the yard, boots sinking into soft soil, skirt whipping behind her, eyes fixed on the flickering orange that threatened their livelihood. Horses whinnied in panic, banging against their stalls. Clara didn't hesitate. She pushed open the barn doors, the hinges groaning like old bones, and stepped inside, eyes scanning for danger. Flames licked at a corner near the hay bales, smoke stinging her nostrils, the acrid heat brushing her cheeks. Calmly, she started tossing water and blankets, moving with a precision born of necessity. Elias arrived seconds later, heart pounding, watching her hands steady despite the heat and chaos. "You're fearless," he said, voice roughened by awe, but his eyes betrayed the tension between admiration and lingering caution. They worked side by side, passing buckets, securing livestock, the crackle of fire and the horses' snorts composing a symphony of urgency and trust. When the flames finally subsided, leaving scorched wood and lingering smoke, Clara wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, a smear of soot marking her cheek. Elias offered her a hand, and their fingers brushed, electric and fleeting, neither withdrawing. Later, in the quiet aftermath, the ranch settled into a tentative peace. Lanterns were lit inside the house, casting golden circles of warmth on the rough wooden floors. Clara poured coffee, the rich aroma mingling with the lingering scent of smoke, and offered Elias a cup. Their hands met over the rim, a moment so brief it might have been imagined, yet it lingered in the air between them, a spark neither could deny. They sat across from each other at the worn table, steam curling between them like whispered confessions. Clara spoke first, her voice low and intimate, recounting fragments of her life before the frontier, the cramped city streets, the smell of coal smoke, the quiet desperation that had led her here. Elias listened, the tension in his shoulders easing, yet only enough to permit trust in small increments. When he finally spoke, it was in hesitant fragments, each word a careful step into vulnerability. My little girl, she doesn't trust easily, he admitted, eyes fixed on the table. I've tried to shield her from anyone who might. Take her from us. Clara nodded, understanding threading through her gaze. I know about protection, she said softly, and about longing. Silence settled, thick and comforting, punctuated by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the gentle hiss of the lantern. The unspoken question, can she be the mother he seeks, hung between them, a shadow neither dared to dispel entirely. Later, as Elias stood to leave the table, their hands brushed again while reaching for the coffee cup, the contact fleeting, but enough to ignite awareness of each other's nearness. He paused in the doorway, gaze lingering on her, conflicted between desire and the fear of reopening old wounds. Clara watched him go, heart tightening, a mixture of hope and yearning pressing against her chest. That night she lingered by the fire, the warmth washing over her like a promise, yet tempered by the memory of his distant expression, the silent question that remained unanswered. The wind moaned against the walls outside, rattling the shutters and carrying the scent of smoke, a reminder of the barn and the fragility of all they were trying to protect. In the quiet, she poured another cup of coffee, inhaling the bitter aroma and tracing circles on the rim with her fingers, imagining a life where trust could grow slowly, like seedlings in thawing soil. Elias's shadow appeared in the doorway once more, hesitant, a figure caught between grief and hope. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world beyond the ranch seemed to vanish, leaving only the fragile promise of understanding, connection, and a warmth neither had dared hope to find in so long. She smiled faintly, the curve of her lips carrying courage and invitation, and he nodded in silent acknowledgement before retreating to his solitude, leaving Clara with the ache of anticipation and the soft glow of firelight painting the room with unspoken longing. The sky darkened abruptly, clouds rolling across the plains like a storm-drilled cavalry, black and menacing, swallowing the light of late afternoon. Wind shredded the grass and tossed dust into Clara's face as she scrambled across the yard, her skirts plastered to her legs with wet grit. The first drops fell, sharp and cold, stinging her skin as she grasped the corner of the barn, listening to the distant rumble that rolled across the horizon like a warning. Elias emerged from the house, coat flapping violently, eyes narrowed against the growing deluge. "We need to secure the barn now," he shouted over the rising roar of wind. Clara nodded, teeth chattering, and together they moved with urgency, hauling ropes, fastening loose boards. The rain, hammering down in relentless sheets. Their hands collided as they grabbed the same coil of rope, fingers brushing through the water, sticky mud splattering onto boots and skirts, dark streaks marking the struggle. Clara yelped as a piece of wet timber shifted beneath her, threatening to pitch her forward. Instinctively, Elias's hands closed around her waist, steadying her, heart hammering as their eyes met in the stark, flickering light of distant lightning. The brief intimacy left a warmth in her chest that battled the cold, a silent acknowledgement that neither had expected. Thunder cracked above them, shaking the barn walls and rattling the corrals, yet they pressed on, driven by urgency and an unspoken rhythm that seemed to bind them together. Rain-slicked boards and sodden hay made every step treacherous, but Clara's determination held, mirrored by Elias's careful attentiveness. His jaw set as he guided her movements, teaching without words, protecting without intruding. As the storm intensified, the horses in the stall snorted nervously, paws scraping and hooves slipping, and Clara moved among them with steady hands, calming their fear as she had learned to calm her own. By the time the rain began to slacken, the barn stood secured, the ropes tight and boards firm, a testament to labor and fleeting collaboration. They collapsed near the doorway, soaked and shivering, clothes clinging to their frames, yet eyes locked in a fragile understanding forged in shared danger. That evening, the fire in the house offered only partial reprieve, steam rising from the pot of stew that simmered on the stove, scent mingling with the lingering wetness from their soaked garments. They sat side by side, blankets draped loosely over shoulders, bodies stiff from cold, letting silence speak where words felt inadequate. Clara traced her fingers along the rim of her cup, watching the steam curl upward like whispers of what could be, while Elias's gaze lingered on her profile, hesitant yet drawn. Shadows flickered against the walls, firelight highlighting the lines of exhaustion and determination on her face, and he shifted slightly, the brush of his arm against hers sparking a subtle warmth neither acknowledged aloud. Outside, the wind had settled into a mournful murmur, rattling shutters and carrying the faint scent of damp earth and lightening ozone. Clara caught a movement near the doorway, Elias's daughter peeking out, wide-eyed, drenched curls plastered to her forehead, fear stark against the storm's aftermath. She clutched the doorframe, trembling, and Clara's heart constricted at the sight. It was a reminder that her work went beyond fences and hay. She needed to reach the heart of a child, to prove she could be more than a laborer, to earn trust where fear had taken root. Elias noticed her gaze and frowned, watching his daughter retreat slightly, protective instincts rising. Clara felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy on her shoulders. Realizing that love and labor could not simply coexist, they had to be cultivated carefully, patiently, like the land itself after a drought. They exchanged a look, brief and loaded, acknowledging both the triumph and the tension, the storm outside mirrored by the turbulence between them, unresolved yet undeniable. That night Clara lay awake in her small room, listening to the wind's whisper against the eaves, replaying the events, the brush of hands, the near fall, the flash of lightning in Elias's eyes, and the fragile, wary gaze of his daughter. She understood now that the promise of her labor would not be enough. She would need persistence, patience, and courage to navigate hearts wounded by grief. And somewhere deep within her, the seed of a determination grew. To prove herself, not only to Elias, but to the child who had inherited a lifetime of loss. The storm had passed, leaving a soaked, battered land in its wake. But it had also cleared the air between them. A tentative connection forged in mud, rain, and shared danger. One that neither the cold nor the lingering fear could fully extinguish. A fragile flame in the shadowed expanse of Harper Ranch. The smell of fresh bread wafted through the Harper Ranch kitchen, mingling with the earthy scent of well-worn wood and the lingering hint of hay from the morning chores. Clara hummed softly to herself, kneading dough on the floured table, the motion rhythmic and soothing, as if each push and fold stitched together the fragile trust she was building. In the corner, Elias's daughter watched from a low chair, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide with cautious curiosity. "Would you like to help me?" Clara asked gently, voice warm like the fire glowing in the hearth. The girl hesitated, then shuffled forward, tentative hands brushing the flour as Clara guided them over the dough, showing her how to press and fold without crushing the mixture. Elias lingered in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed, heart caught between relief and a gnawing fear. Each small act of cooperation, each shy smile from the child, eased some of the tension coiling in his chest. Yet he could not abandon the walls he had built around his heart. Afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes and the golden strands of Clara's hair as she read aloud by candlelight. Her voice gentle, carrying stories of far-off cities and dreams that had seemed impossible. The girl curled against her side, listening intently, eyes tracing the flickering shadows on the walls, slowly learning to trust the warmth of a stranger who moved with patience rather than authority. Elias watched from across the room, noting the contrast between Clara's gentle guidance and the harshness he had always associated with frontier life. Each laugh, each tender glance she offered, filled the empty spaces of the house, revealing a life Elias had forgotten could exist, a life where warmth and tenderness could thrive amidst grit and labor. Outside, the ranch began to show subtle signs of recovery. Repaired fences, sturdy gates, and organized tools mirrored the gradual healing of the household, a quiet symbolism of trust taking root alongside the land's renewal. Shared routines became small rituals, a brush of hands while handing a cup, quiet glances across the table, the soft swish of skirts, and the scrape of boots echoing in the still rooms. Clara's presence, patient and persistent, wove a fragile rhythm into their days, threading Elias and his daughter closer to each other, each act of care a stitch in a slowly mending fabric. Yet the quiet was disrupted one morning by the arrival of a letter, the paper soft and creased from travel, stamped with the seal of a past Clara had thought left behind. She hesitated, hands trembling slightly as she unfolded it, the words inside threatening to pull her away from the fragile trust she had nurtured, from the warmth she had begun to feel. Elias noticed her stillness, the flicker of concern crossing his features as he reached for her hand, though she did not meet his gaze. The child watched, sensing the tension, retreating slightly into herself, clinging to the growing familiarity that Clara had cultivated with patience and care. The fire flickered between them that evening, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor as Clara read the letter once more, her expression clouded with uncertainty. Elias pulled a chair closer, silent, offering the quiet comfort of his presence without words, aware that the bond they were forging was fragile and could shatter with a single decision. He studied her face, etched with worry and longing, and wondered if the promises she had made to the ranch, to him, to his daughter, would withstand the pull of her past. The evening passed with minimal conversation, each lost in thought, the fire crackling and filling the room with a soft, hypnotic rhythm. Clara's hand brushed the edge of the table, lingering near Elias's as though seeking connection without needing to speak, a tentative bridge between fear and hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder, hinting at storms yet to come, yet inside, the warmth of the hearth and the glow of shared presence created a fragile sanctuary. In those quiet moments, Elias felt the stirrings of something he had not known he could feel again: hope. A hope that the careful patience Clara offered might not only win his daughter's heart, but also reach the corners of his own grief, slowly filling the void with warmth, trust, and the promise of something enduring. And though the letter sat unopened for now, a shadow of uncertainty hung in the room, a reminder that even amidst progress, the past could intrude and challenge the fragile rhythm they had begun to create. Clara's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter once more, the brittle paper rustling like dry leaves in the wind. The words scrawled across it were sharp and urgent, pulling her back to a life she had tried to leave behind. Her mother ill, her brother's debts mounting, and an unresolved dispute that threatened the family farm she had promised to protect. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room, mirroring the turmoil that churned in her chest. She sank into the chair, fingers pressed to her temples, trying to steady her racing thoughts, but the pull of obligation warred with the life she had begun to build at Harper Ranch. Elias watched from the doorway, his brow furrowed, every muscle in his frame taut with tension. The sight of her distress ignited something protective and possessive, a sharp ache in his chest he could not name. "Clara," he said carefully, stepping closer. "You can't leave me. Not now." She looked up, meeting his storm-gray eyes, and saw the conflict etched deep there, jealousy, fear, and an unspoken longing all entwined in a fragile thread. "I don't know what I can do, Elias," she whispered, voice tight. "My family, they need me." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated by the helplessness pressing against his chest. "They don't understand what we have here," he murmured, the words harsh with emotion. "Or what we're building. I can't. I won't let it go." Misunderstandings, the kind born from love and fear, flared between them, each word weighted with misgivings, each glance shadowed by doubt. Clara's heart ached as she realized how fragile their trust had become, the small victories of warmth and intimacy suddenly threatened by the intrusion of her past. Outside, the sky carried the dull gray of an approaching storm, the wind tugging at the rafters and rattling the shutters. News from the neighboring ranches arrived by rider. Cattle had gone missing, likely stolen under the cover of darkness, and the rivers ran low, hinting at drought. These external threats mirrored the chaos within the house, a tangible reflection of how intertwined their lives had become and how perilous the frontier truly was. Clara rose, determination battling the gnawing fear in her chest, and began preparing for the day's work, stacking hay, checking fences, and readying the livestock, every movement deliberate, a silent promise to herself and the ranch. Elias followed, though his presence was tense, a storm of protective instincts warring with his desire to trust her judgment. Their movements occasionally collided, brief touches that carried electric tension, each one reminding them both of the bond that still existed despite the misunderstandings. That evening, Clara lit the lanterns, the warm glow flickering across her weary features as she spoke to Elias's daughter, coaxing laughter from the girl with gentle teasing and shared stories. Elias watched, heart constricting with longing and fear, aware that the love he felt was as fragile as it was real. He had to decide whether to shield himself forever, or risk opening fully, letting the warmth of trust and love flow despite the past that clung like winter frost. The night deepened, wind whipping around the house, echoing the tension in the room. Yet inside, small acts, a shared blanket, a hand lightly brushing against another, laughter coaxed from a child, hinted at hope. Fragile and trembling, but undeniable. Clara's mind flickered between the call of her family and the pull of the life she had begun to cherish, every choice carrying the weight of duty versus desire, labor versus love. Elias, standing near the hearth, traced the pattern of light on the floor, contemplating the possibility of surrendering his heart, the fear of loss wrestling with the longing that had grown over months of shared struggle, firelight, and silent understanding. The ranch itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for their next move. The looming drought and shadow of thieves a stark reminder that survival demanded more than effort. It demanded courage, trust, and commitment. Finally, Clara lowered the letter, a resolute glint in her eyes, and met Elias's gaze, the silence between them heavy yet full of unspoken understanding. They both knew the choices ahead would shape more than the ranch. They would shape hearts, futures, and the fragile bonds they were still learning to trust. Rain pattered lightly on the roof, a promise of cleansing and renewal. Yet the storm of emotions within both Clara and Elias raged on, leaving them poised on the cusp of decisions that would determine whether love and labor could finally exist together, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and more enduring than the shadows of their pasts. The first light of dawn broke over Harper Ranch, casting a soft glow on dew-dampened pastures and the sturdy fence lines Clara had helped mend. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth as she walked toward the barn, inhaling the crisp air tinged with hay and fresh soil, the scent of possibility mingling with labor well done. She had made her decision. Her promise was no longer a hope or a challenge. It was a choice she would honor with every beat of her heart. Elias appeared at the gate, coat dusted with morning frost, eyes shadowed with the remnants of sleepless nights, but brightened by a cautious optimism. "You're staying," he said simply, the words carrying relief, pride, and something deeper he couldn't yet name. Clara nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips, hands brushing briefly as they met at the gate, the touch a silent affirmation of mutual trust and commitment. Together they set about the day's work with renewed energy, repairing fences that had begun to sag under time and weather, reinforcing gates, and ensuring that the livestock were accounted for and content. Every hammer strike and rope knot felt like a quiet act of bonding, a merging of lives through shared labor and intention. The child followed them at a cautious distance, curiosity slowly overcoming hesitation, mimicking the motions she saw, learning the rhythm of a home that could be both safe and warm. By midday, the air had shifted, the oppressive tension of previous storms replaced by a light breeze and the faint scent of rain-soaked earth evaporating under the sun. Elias stopped to rest, leaning against a fence post, shoulders relaxed for the first time in months. He spoke quietly, voice carrying the weight of his past grief. "I've lost so much. I thought I'd never feel a family whole again." Clara's gaze softened, hands reaching to clasp his. "And yet," she said, voice steady, "here we are. Together, We can build something stronger than loss." His eyes lingered on hers, absorbing the truth in her words, and at last, he lowered his arms to encircle her in a tentative, careful embrace, one that spoke of vulnerability, longing, and the tentative bloom of love rekindled. The wind shifted, rustling the grass in gentle applause, and the child stepped forward, watching from the gate before taking Clara's hand in hers, small fingers curling around warmth and safety, accepting her slowly as a maternal presence, a bridge between past sorrows and new beginnings. Afternoon sunlight poured across the ranch as they moved together, repairing tool sheds, moving livestock, and securing water sources that had threatened the farm's survival. Laughter began to ripple through the spaces once heavy with silence, subtle yet profound, a sign of life returning, of hearts opening in tandem with the land's recovery. As the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and violet, Clara and Elias paused on the porch, boots muddy, hands still entwined, eyes tracing the long shadows cast by the final golden rays. The fire crackled in the hearth behind them, flickering warmth against their weary forms, while the scent of evening air carried hints of rain and promise. Elias exhaled slowly, a weight lifting as he admitted fully, in whispered tones, that he longed for a family healed by love, for a heart that could open again despite the scars. Clara's smile met his, steady and tender, as they leaned closer, lips brushing briefly before a full embrace bound them in a moment of quiet triumph and passion, the culmination of trust earned and barriers dismantled. Their daughter nestled between them, finally at ease, the three forming a tableau of newfound connection, the ranch itself standing as silent witness to the resilience of hearts and land alike. Twilight deepened, stars emerging one by one, and the porch glowed with the warmth of candlelight and fire. The world beyond softened into shadow. Clara rested her head against Elias's shoulder, and he held her with a protective yet gentle firmness, as if promising that neither the storms of weather nor of life could undo what they had forged together. The long shadows stretched across the porch, mingling with golden light, casting a tranquil rhythm over the land they had fought to save. The ranch thrummed with quiet life, and for a fleeting moment, the past felt fully behind them. In that shared embrace, under the storm-cleared sky, the question lingered, tender and unspoken. Can love truly heal the coldest heart? And in the glow of the setting sun, for Harper Ranch and the three souls bound to it, the answer seemed finally within reach.